3 days before Christmas, I learned something that split my life cleanly into a before and an after. When the notification appeared on my phone, I was standing alone in my kitchen, staring at a mug of black coffee that had already gone cold. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a system glitch, a decimal point gone rogue. But it wasn't. It was the moment I realized my own daughter had emptied more money than most people earn in several years, not for survival, not for an emergency, but to reward the people she called her real family. And she did it using my card. If you're listening to this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. My name is Richard Hale. I am 65 years old, and for more than 3 decades, I built my life with discipline, patience, and sacrifice. I was a senior operations consultant, or rather, I was until very recently. I founded my firm in the early 90s, when fax machines still mattered and sleep was optional. I worked long days, very long nights. I skipped vacations, weddings, and birthdays. Not because I wanted to, but because I believed in responsibility. Because after my wife passed away, responsibility became my religion. December 20th began like any other winter weekday. I woke up at 6 in the morning in my condominium overlooking Lakeshore Drive. The city was quiet, wrapped in that pale, gray silence Chicago wears in December. I brewed my coffee, checked my emails, and opened my banking app out of routine, not worry. That was when my phone vibrated. Unusual transaction detected on your business account. I frowned. I had alerts set for anything over a modest threshold. That account was used strictly for company operations, payroll, vendor contracts, professional services. Personal expenses never touched it. Then I saw the amount. 3 transactions. Within less than 24 hours. The total made my chest tighten. I refreshed the screen. Once. Twice. Still there. The numbers didn't change, but something inside me did. I sat down slowly, as if the floor had tilted. My first thought was fraud. Identity theft. Maybe a clone card. Anything other than the truth I already felt creeping toward me. I called the bank immediately. The representative was calm, polite, professional. She verified my identity, placed me on a brief hold, then returned with information that drained every ounce of warmth from the room. "Sir," she said, "the transactions were authorized using the secondary card issued under your account." Secondary card. I already knew whose name was on it. Still, I asked, "And who is that card registered to?" There was a pause. A brief one, just long enough. "Richard Hale," she said carefully. "The additional card is registered to Melissa Hale Turner, my daughter, the girl I raised alone since she was 12 years old. After cancer took her mother faster than either of us could understand." I felt something leave my body then. Not air, certainty. The representative continued. Unaware, she was narrating the collapse of a lifetime of trust. 2 charges were for first-class international flights. Another was for a luxury hotel reservation overseas. The destinations blurred together in my mind, but the intent was unmistakable. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. I asked for the travel dates. She hesitated, citing policy, but confirmed the essentials. For passengers, departure in 2 days. Return scheduled after the new year. The passengers were not my daughter and her husband. They were her in-laws. People I had met a handful of times. People who had always spoken to me with polite distance and careful judgment. People who measured worth in labels, addresses, and dinner reservations. I thanked the representative, ended the call, and sat there in silence. I had given Melissa that card years earlier, after her wedding. I remember the moment clearly. We were sitting at my dining table. I told her it was only for emergencies. Real emergencies. The kind where a phone call might not reach me in time. She promised me she would never abuse it. For years, she didn't. That made what came next hurt more than the amount itself. Because betrayal doesn't wound you with surprise. It wounds you with memory. I opened my laptop and pulled up the detailed statement. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed confirmation beyond disbelief. As the page loaded, I noticed my hands were shaking. There it was. The charges were split deliberately, each one carefully placed just below the level that would have triggered an automatic freeze. That detail told me everything. This wasn't desperation. This was calculation. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, try to remember when my daughter stopped seeing me as a father and started seeing me as a resource. Outside, traffic moved. People hurried through the cold with shopping bags and holiday plans. The world continued, unaware that in a quiet apartment overlooking frozen water, a man was realizing his greatest investment had turned against him. And that was only the beginning. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I had ignored over the past year. Shorter phone calls, excuses for missed dinners, the subtle irritation in my daughter's voice whenever money was mentioned, not asked for, just mentioned. At some point before dawn, I stopped pretending there was a misunderstanding to clear up. This wasn't confusion. It was entitlement. At 7:30 the next morning, I picked up my car keys and drove north toward the Gold Coast neighborhood where my daughter Melissa lived with her husband. A place I had helped them secure years earlier. A place I had once believed symbolized her stability. The roads were quiet. Snow lined the sidewalks in thin, dirty piles. Every traffic light felt longer than usual. I rang the doorbell twice. Her husband, Daniel, opened the door wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my first car. His expression shifted the moment he saw me. Not concern, not surprise, irritation. "Richard," he said, "it's early. I need to speak with my daughter," I replied. My voice sounded steady, but I felt hollow. He hesitated, then stepped aside. Melissa was sitting on the couch with a ceramic mug in her hands. She didn't stand. She didn't look startled. She looked prepared. "Dad," she said casually, "what's going on?" I didn't sit down. I pulled out my phone and turned the screen toward her. "You spent over $200,000, I said slowly, from my business account. The room went still. Melissa set her mug down carefully, as if bracing it against a tremor. When she finally looked up at me, there was no guilt in her eyes, only resolve. "They deserved it," she said. The words didn't register at first. "Who?" I asked. "My in-laws," she replied calmly. "They've worked their whole lives. They've never traveled like that. Daniel, and I wanted to give them something special." I felt something snap. "You didn't think to ask me?" I said, "Not even once." Daniel stepped closer to her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You've always been controlling with money," he said. "Melissa knew you'd say no." Controlling. The word echoed like a foreign language. "I worked 16 hours a day for decades," I said quietly, "to give you everything. That card was for emergencies. This is a family emergency," Melissa said flatly. I stared at her, searching for the child I remembered. The girl who once waited up for me so we could eat dinner together at midnight. She crossed her arms. "They're my real family now," she said. The sentence landed like a blow to the chest. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. "You're a real family," I repeated. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "They show up. They call. They make time. They make me feel valued." Every word rewrote my past. Daniel nodded in agreement. "You were never really present, Richard. You were always working, always busy." I laughed, a short, broken sound. "I was working so you wouldn't have to struggle," I said. "So you could go to private school. So you could attend an elite university. So you'd never worry about rent or tuition or medical bills. And you never let me forget it," Melissa snapped. "You remind me every chance you get. It's exhausting." I felt the ground shift beneath me. "So I sacrificed my life," I said slowly. "And now that's a flaw?" She stood up. "Love shouldn't come with conditions," she said. That was the moment I understood. She didn't see sacrifice. She saw obligation. I nodded once. "I understand," I said. She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic." I walked out without another word. I didn't use the elevator. I took the stairs, my legs heavy, my chest tight. When I reached my car, I sat behind the wheel for several minutes before starting the engine. I cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. I cried for the daughter I lost. For the years I invested. For the belief that love, if given generously enough, would be returned. But beneath the grief, something else formed. Clarity. Cold. Sharp. Unforgiving. By the time I drove back to my apartment, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I don't remember the drive home. I know I parked the car. I know I unlocked the door. But everything in between felt like moving through water, heavy and slow. Inside my apartment, the silence pressed in on me. No television, no radio, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic below. I sat down at my desk and stared at the screen without touching the keyboard. I didn't want to know more, and I needed to know everything. Eventually, I opened my laptop and logged into the account again. Not the mobile version this time. The full statement, line by line. No filters. As the data loaded, something uncomfortable surfaced in my mind, a realization I hadn't allowed myself earlier. If my daughter had done this once, so deliberately, so strategically, then this probably wasn't the first time. I scrolled. At first, nothing looked out of place. Payroll, client invoices, vendor expenses. Then I adjusted the date range. And there it was, a charge from early spring. Not enormous, just large enough to notice if you were looking for it. I clicked, then another, and another. The pattern revealed itself slowly, like fog lifting. Smaller amounts, carefully placed, spread across months. Always just under thresholds. Always during periods when my business revenue was highest. I leaned back, my stomach tightening. This wasn't reckless. This was disciplined. This was someone who understood cash flow. Someone I had taught. By midnight, I knew I couldn't process this alone. At 7 the next morning, I called Martin Caldwell, my accountant of more than 4 decades. The man who had helped me build my firm from nothing, who had stood beside me through audits, recessions, and the years after my wife died. "Martin," I said when he answered, "I need to see you today." He heard it immediately. "I'll clear my morning," he said. "Come in at 8:30. His office overlooked Michigan Avenue, the windows tall and dignified like the man himself. He studied me silently as I sat down across from him. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "My daughter stole from me," I replied. He didn't interrupt. I laid everything out. The charges, the confrontation, the words she used. When I finished, Martin removed his glasses and set them on the desk. "This isn't a misunderstanding," he said quietly. "This is misappropriation." "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want the truth." He nodded. Then we audited everything. For the next several hours, we combed through accounts I hadn't scrutinized in years. Martin used forensic software designed to detect anomalies in large operational budgets. Red markers began to appear on the screen. The first significant charge dated back nearly a year. Renovation services. I frowned. She never mentioned remodeling. Martin clicked into the detail. The billing address wasn't my daughter's. It belonged to her in-laws. My throat tightened. Then came a vehicle purchase. A luxury sedan, not registered to Melissa. Then monthly expenses. Restaurants, boutiques, jewelry, specialty wine distributors. Always the same timing. Always predictable. Always deliberate. Martin totaled the figures and turned the screen toward me. The final number stared back. More than $270,000. In less than a year. I stared at it without blinking. "She's been financing them," I whispered. "All of them." Martin nodded grimly. "She treated your account like a personal endowment." I closed my eyes. I remembered teaching her about budgeting, about timing expenses, about thresholds and alerts. I remember being proud of how quickly she learned. I had trained my own thief. "This qualifies as sustained fraud," Martin said carefully. "Legally speaking." I swallowed. "I don't want her arrested," I said. "But you also cannot ignore this," he replied. "If you do, you're enabling it." He slid a folder toward me. "There is another option," he said. "One that protects you without destroying her." I opened the folder. Asset separation, account revocation, estate restructuring, control, not punishment, recovery. "How fast can we act?" I asked. "Immediately," he said. I nodded. "Then we do everything." As he began making calls, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time since my wife died, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. Once the decision was made, everything moved quickly. Not emotionally. Emotionally, I felt strangely numb, but procedurally, with ruthless efficiency. Martin remained seated behind his desk, phone already in hand, moving with the calm precision of a surgeon who had performed the same operation hundreds of times before. "First," he said, "we remove all access." He He dialed the bank directly, not a general line, but a private number reserved for long-standing clients. When the account manager answered, Martin introduced himself, then handed the phone to me. "Mr. Hale," the man said, recognizing my voice immediately. "How can I help you?" "I need every secondary card linked to my name canceled immediately," I said, including the one issued to my daughter. There was no hesitation. "Yes, sir. The cancellation will be effective within the hour." "And I want written confirmation," I added, "for every account where she appears as authorized user or beneficiary." The manager paused briefly, then responded with professional restraint. "You currently have 4 accounts where your daughter is listed," he said. "A joint savings account opened when she was a minor, a fixed-term deposit, your primary investment portfolio, and the business account." Each item felt like a reminder of trust one had extended without question. "Remove her from all of them," I said. Immediately, the confirmation emails began arriving before I even ended the call. Next came the automatic transfers. For more than 5 years, I had sent my daughter a monthly amount without fail. I never framed it as support. I framed it as stability, something she could rely on while she and her husband built their life. Martin pulled up the records. "You've been transferring a little over $15,000 every month," he said quietly, "since the year she married." I did the math in my head. The total made my chest tighten. "There's no contract," he continued. "No legal obligation." "Cancel it," I said. "Effective immediately." He nodded and typed. Then came the insurance policies. 2 of them. One modest, one substantial. Both named my daughter as sole beneficiary. When the agent on the phone asked if I was sure, I answered without hesitation. "Yes," I said. "I'm absolutely certain." I named 2 charities instead, organizations that supported widowed parents and disadvantaged students, causes that honored the woman I had loved and lost. By the time we finished, it was late afternoon. The room felt lighter, not because I was happy, but because I was no longer exposed. Martin leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. "There's one more thing you should prepare for," he said. I met his gaze. "When she realizes what's happened," he continued, "she will panic. She will call. She may come to your door. She may accuse you of cruelty." "I know," I replied. "And you're ready?" I thought of the word she had used. "My real family." "Yes," I said, "I am." That evening, I returned to my apartment and did something I hadn't done in years. I cooked dinner for myself. Simple food. Nothing elaborate. I ate slowly, deliberately, in silence. My phone buzzed several times. I didn't look at it. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to sit with my own thoughts without preparing for someone else's needs. And somewhere deep inside, a boundary settled into place, firm, immovable, not built from anger, built from self-respect. For 2 days, there was silence. No calls, no messages, no accusations. Part of me wondered if she hadn't noticed yet. Another part knew better. My daughter had lived her entire adult life cushioned by invisible systems she never questioned. When those systems disappeared, the impact would not be subtle. It came on the evening of December 23rd. I was sitting at my kitchen table eating lentil soup when my phone lit up. "Melissa." I let it ring. It rang again and again. By the 5th call, I set the phone face down and continued eating. The sound of vibration against the wood table was almost rhythmic. Desperate. Then the messages arrived. "Dad, please answer. The cards don't work. I'm at a restaurant, and this is an emergency. You're humiliating me." I took another spoonful and chewed slowly. I had imagined this moment. I had prepared for it. What surprised me was not the panic in her messages, but how calm I felt reading them. The 6th call came a few minutes later. I answered. I didn't raise the phone to my ear. I placed it on the table and put on speaker. "Dad," Melissa said, her voice shaking. "What did you do?" "I canceled the cards," I replied evenly. "What?" she whispered. "All of them." "Yes." There was noise in the background. Glasses clinking. Voices murmuring. I pictured immediately. She had booked one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. A pre-holiday dinner for her in-laws and their extended family. A final display of generosity, funded, as always, by me. "You didn't warn me," she said. "I'm here with everyone. The bill is enormous." I swallowed calmly. You didn't warn me when you spent more than $250,000, I said. I assumed we were no longer informing each other of major financial decisions. Her breathing became frantic. You can't do this now, she said. This is embarrassing. No, I corrected. This is accountability. She lowered her voice. The bill is over $4,000, she whispered. I don't have that. I waited a moment before answering. Then I suggest you ask your real family. There was silence. I don't understand, she said. You told me they value you more than I do, I continued. That they are your real family. Surely they won't mind paying for their own celebration. Daniel's voice entered the call. Richard, he said sharply, this is out of control. Is it? I asked. Or is it just inconvenient now that the money stopped? He hesitated. What are you talking about? He said. Ask your wife, I replied. Ask her about the renovations. The car. The monthly transfers. Silence again. Melissa returned to the phone, her voice breaking. Dad, please, she said. Just reactivate one card. We can talk later. No, I said gently. You're destroying us, she cried. No, I said. I'm releasing myself. I hung up. I turned the phone off. And for the first time since my wife died, I felt something close to peace. The days that followed passed in near silence. I turned my phone off completely. No vibrations. No notifications. No apologies that would have come too late anyway. I needed space, not to punish her, but to hear my own thoughts without interruption. On the morning of December 26th, I put on my coat and walked through the cold streets toward an office I had avoided for years. A notary. His name was Howard Levin, a man I had known since my early consulting days. He specialized in estate planning for people who preferred certainty over sentiment. When he saw me enter, he studied my face for a moment longer than usual. You look lighter, he said, and heavier. That sounds about right, I replied. We sat across from each other in a room lined with leather-bound volumes and framed certificates. He opened a folder and adjusted his glasses. Martin briefed me, he said. Before we begin, I need to confirm something. This decision, it's not reactive. I met his eyes. No, I said. It's corrective. He nodded. Howard read aloud the valuation of my estate, my apartment, my remaining accounts, my firm, which was still operational but no longer required my daily involvement. Every figure represented decades of restraint. Every asset carried a memory. And your daughter? He asked quietly. She will receive personal items of sentimental value only, I said. Her mother's jewelry, the family albums, nothing more. Howard paused. You understand this effectively removes her from inheritance. Understand, I said. She removed herself long before I did. He slid the document toward me. Once signed, this becomes binding. I took the pen. My hand did not shake. When the final signature was placed and the seal stamped, the sound echoed in the room like a door closing. Not angrily, decisively. When I stepped back outside, the winter air felt sharper, cleaner. I walked aimlessly for an hour, past shops and cafes filled with people preparing for holidays. Their lives continued untouched by the quiet ending of mine. And yet, I didn't feel empty. I felt unburdened. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop and searched for something I had never allowed myself to consider. Volunteer work abroad. Not vacations. Not luxury. Purpose. I renewed my passport. Then I booked a one-way flight. Not away from my daughter. Toward myself. I left without a farewell. No dramatic announcements. No final letters. No explanations that would only invite arguments I had already outgrown. On the morning of January 15th, I woke before the alarm, as if my body already understood that something fundamental was ending. I brewed one last cup of coffee in my apartment and drank it standing by the window, watching the lake shimmer faintly beneath winter clouds. For decades, this view had symbolized success. That morning, it felt like a cage. I locked the door behind me and handed the keys to a neighbor who had agreed to oversee the apartment until it sold. Everything else I owned fit into 2 suitcases. The rest I had donated, sold, or left behind without regret. At the airport, no one hugged me goodbye, and I was grateful for that. The flight was long and quiet. I watched continents pass beneath the wing, places I had postponed visiting because responsibility always came first. Somewhere over the ocean, I realized I was no longer anxious. I was curious. When I landed in Southeast Asia, heat wrapped around me like a living thing. The air smelled of spices and rain and unfamiliar flowers. I checked into a modest hostel with a room barely larger than my old walk-in closet. It was perfect. For the first time in years, no one asked me for anything. I spent days walking aimlessly, absorbing noise, color, movement. I slept deeply. I ate simply. I spoke to strangers who expected nothing from me except courtesy. Within a week, I found a volunteer program teaching languages to children who had lost far more than money. They greeted me with shy smiles and unguarded curiosity. They didn't know who I was. They didn't care what I owned. They only wanted me present. And for the first time in my life, presence felt like enough. Healing did not arrive all at once. It came quietly, in small moments I didn't recognize at first. Mornings began with the sound of bells from a nearby temple and the rustle of palm leaves moving in the heat. I woke before sunrise, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. For decades, waking up had meant obligation. Now it meant possibility. The children arrived barefoot each day, notebooks tucked under their arms, eyes bright with expectation. They sat on worn wooden benches and waited patiently, as if my presence mattered simply because I was there. I taught them words at first, simple ones, then sentences, then stories. But they taught me something far more valuable. They taught me what gratitude looks like when it isn't transactional. No one asked about my past. No one hinted at what they might gain from knowing me. They listened because they wanted to learn, not because they wanted access. One afternoon, after class, a small boy handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside was a drawing of a stick figure with gray hair standing beside children holding books. At the top, written carefully, were the words Teacher Richard. I sat there for a long time after everyone left. For years, I had believed my value came from what I provided financially, from what I could fix, fund, or secure. Here, stripped of those roles, I discovered something humbling. I was still enough. Weeks turned into months. The ache I carried dulled into something manageable. I no longer checked my phone. I no longer replayed conversations. At some point, without ceremony, I forgave my daughter. Not aloud, not in writing. I forgave her so I could continue breathing freely. That was when I met Elena. She was volunteering with a regional education initiative around my age, with eyes that suggested she had lived through disappointment and chosen growth anyway. We spoke cautiously at first, like people who had both been burned by expectations. She didn't ask about my family. I didn't ask about hers. We talked about books, about purpose, about what happens when you stop living for approval. One evening, sitting beneath a sky heavy with stars, she said something that settled deeply into me. Family, she said, is not who takes from you. It's who grows with you. In that moment, I understood something my daughter never had. Family is chosen, and sometimes you must walk away from blood to find it. Time has a way of revealing truth without raising its voice. It doesn't argue. It doesn't accuse. It simply continues. By the time spring arrived, I no longer counted days. That habit had fallen away somewhere between the final weeks of winter and the first warm morning when the jacaranda trees bloomed in quiet defiance of everything that had come before. Counting days belonged to a different life, one governed by deadlines, anniversaries, and silent negotiations with exhaustion. Here, time felt less like a ruler and more like a current. I measured life in moments now, not the dramatic kind, the small ones. Lessons that landed without resistance. Laughter that didn't need justification. Evenings that ended in calm rather than depletion. For the first time in decades, I wasn't collapsing at the end of each day. I was arriving. The community school had grown beyond its original intent. What began as a modest effort to support local education had slowly become something sturdier, an institution built not on ambition, but on consistency. Children came early now, some before the gates opened, waiting with books pressed to their chests. Parents lingered longer during pickup, asking questions not just about grades, but about futures. And the work had grown beyond teaching. Together with Elena, I began helping structure educational programs that could outlive us curricula designed not only to pass exams, but to build confidence. We developed fundraising strategies that didn't rely on pity, but on partnership. Long-term sustainability plans replaced emergency appeals. What I once did for companies chasing valuation, I now did for classrooms chasing opportunity. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had been told I was good with systems, good with growth, good with scale. But it turned out I was best when the stakes weren't profit, but people. The skills I once used to build empires were finally serving something human. I was no longer running from my past. I was building beyond it. That distinction mattered. Running implies fear. Building implies intention. One afternoon, while reviewing paperwork under the shade of a mango tree near the eastern edge of the property, my phone buzzed. The sound startled me. I realized, with mild surprise, that it was the first time in months I'd heard it ring for something other than a utility reminder or a forgotten subscription. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Margaret, my late wife's younger sister. I stared at the phone longer than necessary. The breeze shifted the leaves overhead, dappling the pages in my lap with sunlight. Children's voices drifted from the yard, bright and unburdened. I hesitated. Some connections don't fade, they go dormant. And waking them carries weight. I answered. Richard, she said softly. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I wasn't sure I would either, I admitted. There was a pause. Not awkward. Respectful. What's happened? I asked. She exhaled, a long breath that carried more history than air. I thought you should know. Melissa is working now. I waited. She and her husband sold the condo. They couldn't keep up. They moved to a small apartment outside the city. She's an office assistant. Entry level. Long hours. There was no triumph in her voice. Only fact. No judgment. No embellishment. No apology disguised as news. And how is she? I asked quietly. Margaret hesitated. She says she understands now, she said. She says she didn't know how much you carried for so long. I closed my eyes. Not in pain. In acknowledgement. Understanding is rarely sudden. It's layered, earned through repetition, through friction, through the slow erosion of assumptions. I looked out at the children playing in the yard, barefoot and laughing, their uniforms abandoned in a pile near the well. They ran without urgency, without performance. No one was keeping score. Understanding, I said slowly, comes late for some people. Yes, Margaret agreed. She hasn't tried to reach you again, she added. She's embarrassed. But she's learning. I nodded. Good, I said. Learning was always the goal. When the call ended, I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel satisfaction either. What I felt was resolution. Not closure. Closure implies something sealed. Resolution implies clarity. Melissa was finally standing where I had stood for decades. Responsible for herself. Accountable to reality. Unsupported by illusion. The safety net she once mistook for entitlement had been removed, not by cruelty, but by gravity. The world had simply asked her to carry her own weight, and in doing so, had offered her something dignity adjacent. And I was finally free of the role that had consumed my identity. Provider. Buffer. Excuse. I hadn't realized how quietly that role had hollowed me out. How often love had been confused with endurance. How easily responsibility becomes invisible when it is reliable. That evening, Elena and I walked along the edge of the fields as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in colors too deliberate to be accidental. She didn't speak at first. She never filled silence unless it asked to be filled. The earth was warm beneath our feet. The air smelled faintly of rain that hadn't arrived yet. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played an old song, tinny and nostalgic. She took my hand without ceremony. No announcement. No question. Just contact. You look peaceful, she said. I am, I replied. And the truth of it surprised me with its simplicity, because consequences had arrived, not as punishment, but as balance. The universe hadn't shouted. It hadn't demanded apology or spectacle. It had simply redistributed weight. And in that quiet justice, we were both allowed to become who we were meant to be. 1 year has passed since the morning my life collapsed. I remember the exact quality of the silence that followed. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just hollow. The kind of quiet that arrives after something fundamental has broken and the noise that once masked it finally stops. At the time, I believed I was witnessing the end of my life as I knew it. I was wrong. What I witnessed was the end of a performance. And I can say this now without bitterness, without drama, without anger that collapse saved me. Not immediately, not gently, but completely. In the weeks that followed, I moved through my days like someone walking out of a burning building, still smelling smoke, still half expecting alarms to sound again. I slept poorly. I ate mechanically. I replayed conversations that no longer existed. For years, my identity had been stitched together by responsibility to my career, to my family, to roles I never questioned because they were familiar. When those roles disappeared, I was left with something uncomfortable. Space. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. Space exposes. It asks questions you can't outsource. It demands that you decide who you are when no one is making demands of you. Eventually, I learned to sit with it. I am writing these words now from a small apartment near the coast. Nothing about it would impress anyone who values excess. The walls are plain. The furniture is functional. There are no symbols of status, no trophies disguised as decor. But every window opens to light. Every room serves a purpose. Nothing here is accidental. In the mornings, the air smells like salt and sunlight instead of stress. I wake early not because I have to, but because my body no longer resists the day. I make coffee slowly. I drink it by the window. Sometimes I watch the ocean. Sometimes I watch people pass below, carrying their own invisible burdens, unaware of how much they are already enough. I live simply now, intentionally. I own less, but I am more. That sentence would have sounded like self-help nonsense to the man I used to be. I once equated ownership with achievement, accumulation with security. I believe success was something you demonstrated, something others could verify by looking at your life from the outside. I was wrong. Success, I've learned, is internal alignment. It's waking up without dread. It's choosing your obligations instead of inheriting them. It's knowing where your responsibility ends and honoring that boundary without guilt. The work Elena and I started has grown beyond what I imagined. When we first talked about expanding the school, our plans were modest. Add a classroom, hire another teacher, secure supplies for the next term. We measured progress in months, not decades. But something happens when intention is clean. People respond. Local educators volunteer their time. Donors contributed without needing recognition. Former students returned not to ask for help, but to offer it. Momentum built not through ambition, but through trust. Today, the school serves hundreds of children. Teachers are paid fairly, not extravagantly fairly. Enough to live with dignity. Enough to stay. Enough to invest themselves fully in their work without resentment. Supplies are never short. That may sound insignificant, but scarcity shapes behavior. When resources are unreliable, people hoard. They compete. They protect themselves. When supplies are steady, attention shifts back to learning, to curiosity, to growth. For the first time in my life, I see a legacy forming. And it has nothing to do with my last name. Everything to do with impact. No buildings carry my name. No plaques list my contributions. I didn't want them to. I've learned that legacy doesn't need attribution to be real. It lives in continuity, in the quiet certainty that something good will continue even when you are no longer present to supervise it. I no longer measure success in dollars earned. I measure it in lives changed, in confidence built, in opportunities widened, in cycles interrupted. That shift didn't come from moral superiority. It came from exhaustion, from the realization that chasing validation is a hunger that never stops eating. Occasionally, I think of my daughter, not with resentment, with clarity. That distinction matters. Resentment blurs truth. Clarity sharpens it. She is learning how to survive without entitlement, how to budget, how to show up every day without a safety net disguised as love, how to tolerate discomfort without outsourcing responsibility to someone else. Those lessons came late, but they came honestly. I know there are those who believe I was cruel, that I abandoned her, that a parent's duty is unconditional support, regardless of cost or consequence. I understand that perspective. I once shared it. But here's the truth: I arrived at slowly, painfully, and without applause. I did not destroy her life. I stopped financing a lie. There's a difference. I stopped enabling a version of adulthood that required my depletion to exist. I stopped confusing sacrifice with virtue. I stopped teaching her by example that love meant self-erasure. That choice cost me comfort. It cost me reputation. It cost me the illusion of being needed. But it gave us both something more valuable: truth. People often ask me if I regret cutting ties so completely. They ask it cautiously, as if expecting grief to spill out once the door is opened, as if distance must always equal damage. My answer surprises them. No, I say. I regret not setting boundaries sooner. Because boundaries are not rejection. They are instruction. They teach others how to treat us. They teach us how to treat ourselves. And when they are absent, relationships don't become more loving, they become more distorted. Love without boundaries is not love. It is permission. And permission, unchecked, turns into expectation. Expectation turns into entitlement. And entitlement destroys gratitude. I've seen this pattern repeat itself across generations, across families, across entire cultures. We fear conflict so deeply that we avoid necessary limits. We mistake discomfort for cruelty. And in doing so, we raise people who are unprepared for reality and resentful when it refuses to bend for them. That is not kindness. It is avoidance. If there is one lesson I leave you with, it is this: you can give everything and still be unappreciated. You can sacrifice endlessly and still be called selfish. You can raise someone with love and watch them choose convenience over character. That does not mean you failed. It means your chapter with them ended. And another chapter, one more honest, more peaceful, more aligned, is waiting. Endings are not always punishments. Sometimes they are promotions. I'm not a bitter man. Bitterness requires fixation. It requires replaying the past as if it can still be negotiated. I no longer negotiate with what has already revealed itself. I'm a free one. And freedom, at this stage of life, is not about escape. It is about release. Release from roles that no longer fit. Release from expectations that were never mutual. Release from the belief that suffering is proof of love. Freedom is choosing where your energy goes. Freedom is sleeping well. Freedom is being able to say no without rehearsing an explanation. Freedom is understanding that your worth does not increase by how much you endure. This is the greatest inheritance I could have ever given myself. Not money, not approval, not legacy as a monument, but peace as a practice. If you're listening to this and finding echoes of your own life within it, know this: you're not selfish for choosing yourself. You're not cruel for ending cycles that harm you. You are not obligated to remain where you are diminished. Some stories end not because they failed, but because they told you everything they could. Thank you for listening. And if this story resonated with you, support the channel, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Sometimes the hardest stories help the most people. Time does something strange when you finally stop running from it. For most of my life, time felt adversarial. Something to outrun, negotiate with, or dominate. I measured it in calendars and contracts, in fiscal quarters and obligations, and how much could be accomplished before exhaustion set in. Time was pressure. Time was scarcity. Time was always asking for more than I felt prepared to give. But when you stop running, time changes its posture. Days slow down. Minutes stretch. Silence stops feeling accusatory. Memories lose their sharp edges. Pain doesn't vanish. That would be dishonest. But it softens like a scar that no longer aches when the weather changes. You know it's there. You respect what caused it. But it no longer defines how you move. I am 66 years old now. Saying that number aloud no longer surprises me, but it often surprises others. When people hear it, they tend to tilt their heads slightly, as if bracing for regret to follow. As if a man my age must be mourning what he lost instead of honoring what he escaped. They wait for confession. They don't get one, because regret is not what lives here. Perspective is. Perspective is quieter than regret. It doesn't ache or accuse. It simply clarifies. It arranges memories into something coherent instead of something heavy. It allows you to look back without the compulsion to defend yourself or condemn anyone else. There are moments, usually quiet ones, when I allow myself to look back without judgment. Not to rewrite history, not to soften it, not to villainize anyone, just to understand it honestly. I see now that my greatest mistake was not trusting my daughter. That sentence may sound harsh, but it's precise. It wasn't that I didn't love her. It wasn't that I didn't want the best for her. It was that I didn't trust her capacity to grow through difficulty. I confused generosity with guidance. I believed love meant removing obstacles. I believed protection meant absorbing consequences meant for her. I believed sacrifice was noble even when it was invisible, even when it quietly depleted me. I thought if I could just smooth the road enough, she would arrive at adulthood unscathed. What I failed to understand was that obstacles are not the enemy of growth. They are its curriculum. Children do not learn responsibility from comfort. They learn it from limits. They learn it from friction, from miscalculation, from realizing that choices have weight and that someone else cannot always carry it for them. By stepping in too often, I didn't make her life easier. I made it artificial. And I denied her those limits for far too long. That realization no longer hurts me. It humbles me. Humility is what remains when pride and shame both burn out. It doesn't ask to be forgiven. It simply accepts responsibility without dramatizing it. It acknowledges error without turning it into identity. From time to time, I hear small updates through distant channels. My former brother-in-law mentions them in passing when we exchange brief messages. A mutual acquaintance sends a casual note after running into her at the grocery store or on a commuter train. Nothing dramatic. Nothing emotional. Just facts. She wakes up early now. She commutes. She tracks expenses. She worries about rent increases and grocery prices. She plans meals instead of ordering them. She compares insurance rates. She delays purchases. She feels the quiet anxiety of living within a budget that does not bend for convenience. She lives within constraints I once absorbed for her. And in doing so, she is finally living in reality. That reality is not glamorous. It is not kind in the way money can be kind. It does not rescue her when she miscalculates, but is honest. And honesty, even when uncomfortable, builds competence. That competence will serve her better than any inheritance I could have left behind. People assume I must feel vindicated. They imagine this as a story with a winner and a loser, with a scoreboard that eventually balanced itself. They expect satisfaction, or at least relief wrapped in moral certainty. I don't feel vindicated. Vindication implies competition. This was never a contest between us. It was a separation between illusion and truth. Illusion said love meant endless provision. Truth said love sometimes means stepping back. Illusion said sacrifice was proof of character. Truth said boundaries are proof of self-respect. Illusion said proximity equaled connection. Truth said connection without respect is erosion. I also learned something else in this season of my life, something I wish I had learned decades earlier, something that would have spared me years of quiet resentment disguised as responsibility. You are not required to destroy yourself to prove your love. You are not obligated to fund disrespect. You are not cruel for withdrawing support that is being abused. And you are not heartless for choosing peace over proximity. Those sentences would have once filled me with guilt. I would have argued with them, qualified them, added exceptions until they collapsed under the weight of my justifications. Now, they simply feel true. Some bonds do not break because of anger. They break because growth demands distance. Distance allows clarity. Distance allows each person to confront themselves without interference. Distance reveals which connections were sustained by obligation rather than mutual regard. I still keep one photograph on my desk. It's an old one. The edges are worn. The colors slightly faded. It's my daughter at about 7 years old, missing 2 teeth, laughing uncontrollably while trying to ride a bicycle down our old street. The bike was too big for her. Her helmet sat crooked. Her knees were perpetually scraped. I was running behind her, arms outstretched, terrified she would fall. I remember that moment vividly. My heart pounding, my breath shallow, every instinct screaming to grab the handlebars, to steady her, to prevent the inevitable. She eventually did fall. She scraped her knee. She cried, loudly, unapologetically, the kind of crying that demands to be witnessed. I knelt beside her. I cleaned the wound. I listened. I waited. Then she got back up. That afternoon, she learned how to ride. Not because I held her up, but because I eventually let go. I wish I had remembered that lesson sooner. Because falling is not cruelty. Preventing every fall is. When you deny someone the experience of falling, you also deny them the experience of recovery. You deny them evidence of their own resilience. You teach them that stability comes from outside themselves. That is not protection. That is dependence. Now, when I wake in the mornings, I do so without anxiety. There is no list waiting to ambush me. No crisis pre-scheduled. No unspoken expectation that today will require another quiet sacrifice. I drink coffee slowly. I read, not to learn, not to improve, but to enjoy language again. I walk without tracking steps or time. I work with intention instead of obligation. When I say yes, it is because I choose to. When I say no, it does not echo with guilt. My life is quieter, but is honest. And honesty, I have learned, is far more peaceful than comfort built on denial. The aftermath is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It is simply what remains when you stop lying to yourself about what love requires and what it costs. This is not a story about abandonment. It is a story about restraint. Not the restraint of withholding affection, but the restraint of no longer interfering with someone else's growth. It is about trusting reality to teach what protection never could. At 66, I no longer chase redemption. I no longer seek to be understood by everyone. I seek alignment with my values, with my energy, with the truth that took me far too long to accept. Time did not heal everything, but it clarified enough. And in that clarity, I finally stopped running. There is a quiet moment that comes late in life. It does not announce itself with drama or revelation. It arrives softly, usually when you are alone, usually when nothing urgent demands your attention. For me, it arrived one afternoon as I sat on a simple wooden chair, watching the sun lower itself into the horizon. I realized I was no longer waiting for anything. Not an apology, not understanding, not redemption. I had already moved on, not away from my daughter, but away from a version of myself that believed love had to be proven through suffering. For most of my life, I thought being a good father meant enduring everything in silence, carrying weight so others wouldn't have to feel it, absorbing disrespect because confrontation felt like failure. But silence does not always mean strength. Sometimes, silence teaches people that you will tolerate anything, and tolerance, mistaken for love, becomes a dangerous teacher. What I did was not abandonment. It was correction. I did not stop loving my daughter. I stopped enabling her worst instincts. There's a difference few people talk about because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our own roles in other people's failures. I had to admit something difficult. My generosity had created dependency. My protection had prevented growth. My fear of being resented had taught her to resent me anyway. Letting go did not make me heartless. It made me honest. And honesty is the foundation of every healthy relationship, including the one you have with yourself. Now, when I think about legacy, I no longer imagine names on buildings or money passed down bloodlines. I imagine something quieter. Children who learn without fear. Young adults who believe opportunity exists. Strangers whose lives improve without ever knowing my name. That kind of legacy cannot be stolen. It cannot be manipulated. It cannot be taken for granted. It exists because it is chosen, not demanded. And perhaps that is the final lesson my daughter unknowingly gave me. By rejecting unconditional love, she forced me to redirect it toward places where it could grow instead of rot. By calling others her real family, she freed me to discover what family actually means. Not obligation, not entitlement, not guilt, but respect, mutual effort, and choice. If you're listening to this and recognize yourself in my story, in my mistakes, in my pain, hear this clearly. It is never too late to reclaim your dignity. It is never selfish to set boundaries. And it is never wrong to walk away from those who only value what you provide. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to choose yourself. I did. And in doing so, I finally learned how to live.